I woke up to voices. Not gentle, not loving, sharp, detached, almost bored. "We're not even her real kids," my stepson said. "Why should we be stuck taking care of her?" Then my stepdaughter's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. "I just hope she doesn't make it. The estate's almost ready anyway." Their words cut through the fog of morphine like a blade. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My arms felt heavy, filled with sand, and wires snaked across my chest like vines choking a tree. The machines behind me beeped slowly. That was the sound of my life still hanging on. And I wasn't sure if I wanted it back. I sensed them at the foot of the hospital bed, close enough to touch me but galaxies away from seeing me as their mother. They didn't know I was awake, or maybe they didn't care. "She didn't even adopt us," he added. "She just married Dad. That doesn't mean we owe her anything." A nurse cleared her throat. "Maybe you should step outside." "Whatever," my stepdaughter muttered, her heels tapping away down the hall like punctuation marks in the sentence of my erasure. I stared at the ceiling tiles and pretended I was still unconscious. Pretended I hadn't just heard the two people I had raised, since they were still wiping applesauce off their chins, talk about me like a burden, like a dead weight they couldn't wait to bury. I had always feared getting old. I never thought the real fear was getting forgotten while still alive. And in that moment, something in me shifted. Not broken, just snapped back into place. They thought I was dying? Good. Let them believe that. Because the woman they thought they could discard? She wasn't the one waking up. I met Richard Pierce when I was 39. At that point, I had already accepted that I might never become a mother. I had built a quiet, stable life teaching literature at a community college, tending to a garden behind my small rental, and spending holidays with a handful of close friends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then Richard came along, charming in a reserved, dependable kind of way. He had 2 young children from his first marriage, Tyler, a quiet 4-year-old boy who flinched at loud sounds, and Emily, just shy of 3, who clung to her father like he was the last solid thing in the world. Their mother had left suddenly, trading the Midwest for a new life overseas. No letters, no calls, just absence. Richard didn't talk about it much, only said she wasn't ready to be a parent. I didn't come into their lives expecting to become anything more than a kind presence. But children don't care about legalities. They care about bedtime songs and warm lunches. They care about someone showing up, and I did. That first winter, Emily called me Mama Joe in a whisper when she had a nightmare. Tyler would sit beside me on the couch, one arm hooked around my elbow like it anchored him. It wasn't a formal title. There were no adoption papers, no courtroom declarations. Just tiny hands reaching for mine and hearts learning to trust again. Richard and I married the following year. He never pushed for me to adopt them. "It's just paperwork," he'd said with a smile. "They know who loves them." Maybe that was when the lie began, believing that love was enough. Over the next 2 decades, I packed their school lunches, helped them study for spelling tests, stayed up when they were sick. I was there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every parent-teacher conference where the teacher would glance at me, then politely say, "Stepmother." And I'd smile like it didn't sting. Because I thought love would be louder than legal terms. I thought it would count when it mattered most. I was wrong. After Richard died pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless, everything changed. Tyler and Emily were in college by then, drifting through life on their own terms. They showed up for the funeral dressed in black, holding my hands like they meant it. That was the last time I felt like I belonged to them. What followed wasn't a rupture. It was a quiet erosion. Phone calls turned into short texts, texts faded into silence. On holidays, they'd appear with smiles and small talk, but they never stayed long. The warmth was gone. The connection, severed somewhere I couldn't reach. I told myself they were busy, building their lives. Maybe that was true for a while. But eventually, I saw it for what it was. I was no longer Mom. I was Joanna. I was the woman who had the deed, the one who kept the house clean, and the fridge full, and the taxes paid. They loved the things I gave them, the comfort, the stability, the traditions, but they no longer loved me. I remember the Thanksgiving just a year before the crash. I woke up at 5 a.m. to make Tyler's favorite pecan pie from scratch. Emily didn't show. Tyler came late and left early, complaining about traffic. Still, I cooked. Still, I hoped. I thought if I just kept loving them, they would find their way back. But love isn't a leash, and I was done dragging it behind me. What I gave them wasn't conditional, but their affection had always been. They were Richard's children by blood. They were mine only when it was convenient. I used to think love was the bond that tied us. Now I understood it was convenience. And the moment I stopped being convenient, I stopped being theirs. The crash happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. No rain, no ice, no warning. Just a sharp curve at the end of Hollow Creek Road, the kind I'd driven 100 times before. I pressed the brake, nothing. Just the eerie clang of resistance, like something inside the car had come undone. The world tilted, then metal, then glass, then nothing. They called it an accident, a fluke, maybe a worn brake pad, maybe an old system finally giving up. But I knew my car. I kept it clean, serviced, and cared for the way some people care for heirlooms. It wasn't neglect, it was something else, something intentional. And the memories came creeping back. Just a week earlier, Emily had borrowed the car, said hers was low on gas, and she was late to a meeting. She brought it back with the seat pushed so far forward I could barely climb in. The mirrors were off and the glove box was half open, I noticed, but I brushed it off. Then there was Tyler. The week before that, he'd taken my keys with a practiced smile. "I'll check your tire pressure," he said. "Looks a little low." He didn't ask, he just went. And when they visited after the accident, still thinking I was unconscious, they didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't even mention the crash. Only one question: what happens if she can't live alone anymore? Not if, when. That's when I knew. They weren't scared I might die. They were scared I might live. And that changed everything. I had spent 2 weeks lying still, pretending to be weaker than I was, but my mind was sharp. My memories clearer than ever. And piece by piece, a new picture formed. Not of a freak accident, but of something planned, orchestrated. A clean exit for them. And now a reckoning for me. 2 months before the crash, I had a feeling. It wasn't fear, not yet, just a tug, a whisper in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. It came the day I passed by the living room with a basket of towels and heard laughter, the kind that's too loud, too casual to be innocent. Tyler was chuckling. "Just give it a couple more years, she'll croak and we'll split the house." Emily snorted. "Bet she leaves it to a cat or some library just to be spiteful." They laughed like it was a joke. But I wasn't laughing. That night I called Russell Kim, a state lawyer, mid-40s, polished, polite, the kind of man who knew how to keep his voice steady, even when the air got cold. We sat across from each other in his quiet office while I slid over my old will, the deed, the insurance policy, everything they thought they'd inherit. Then I handed him a photo of April. She was 6 the year her mother died, my goddaughter. I took her in for 6 months while her father tried to get clean. Sticky hands, wide eyes, always calling me Mama Joe. She's 32 now, works at a women's shelter, sends handwritten letters that smell like citrus and love. Still signs them, "Your girl, April." I want her to have everything I told Russell. He looked up, surprised. Everything. Everything. The house, the savings, the pearl earrings I only wore twice but kept like a promise, the life I built. Because blood never showed up at my door with soup when I had the flu, but April did. Russell didn't ask for details, just nodded and got to work. The new documents were signed and sealed within a week. The original shredded, my instructions airtight. If April couldn't be reached within 30 days of my death, the estate would go to the shelter she worked at. Not a dime to either child. And if they contested, let them try, Russell said with a small smile. They'll waste more than they'll win. I left his office lighter than I'd felt in years. Because for the first time, I wasn't hoping they'd love me again. I was protecting the woman who had loved them all along. Back in the hospital, I said nothing. Silence became my armor. But Clara, the nurse with soft hands and sharper eyes, knew better. She could read people the way some read books. One afternoon, as she checked my vitals, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're aware, aren't you?" I didn't blink, just the faintest nod. That was all she needed. The next morning, a man in navy windbreaker appeared at the window. No badge, no clipboard, just calm eyes and quiet shoes. Clara called him my visitor. "I'm Elliot," he said. "You hired me years ago during your divorce, remember?" Another blink. Yes. I'm good at reading silence, he added. Then he pulled out a photo. My car wrecked, Dusty zoomed in to show the brake line. This was cut, clean. Someone tried to make it look like wear and tear. It wasn't. I didn't feel fear. I felt something colder, sharper, relief. Now it wasn't a suspicion. It was proof. Elliot leaned closer. We've already pulled footage from your street cam and the hospital lobby. Your son logged into the visitor Wi-Fi and opened a document called Advanced Directive Template while you were unconscious. He placed a printout on the tray beside me. Then another photo, my daughter's car in the driveway, time-stamped the night before the crash, despite her telling me she'd been out of town. Clara stood by the door, arms crossed. They think you're helpless, she said. They don't know you've already started fighting back. That evening, she helped me tap out her code on her palm. 3 taps, yes. 1 long drag, get Elliot. And so the plan formed. Not loud, not angry. Precise. Face eyes. Like a scalpel instead of a hammer. Elliot filed the new will. Russell made it official. Clara documented the whispers, the behavior, the small signs of calculated cruelty. Then came the final step. I need 1 signature, Elliot said. Just 1. For legal protection, elder endangerment, attempted harm. This makes it a felony. That night, under dim hallway lights, Clara brought in the clipboard. My hand shook, but I signed. And with that, I stopped being a victim and became the architect of their reckoning. They thought I was dying. But I left the hospital the night before they arrived, rolled out quietly in a wheelchair, wrapped in a navy quilt Grace had sewn years ago, when the kids were still little and afraid of thunderstorms. Grace had been my neighbor for decades, never nosy, just observant. She was the one who noticed Tyler hovering near the mailbox too often, the one who saw Emily sitting in her car out front for 20 minutes without coming to the door. She didn't say much at first, just started writing things down, just in case. She became my silent witness. So when my discharge came, she opened the attic room in her house 3 houses down, with a perfect view of mine. And there, propped up by pillows, sipping tea from a travel mug, I watched them walk into the hospital lobby dressed in black like they were starring in their own performance of grief. He wore a wrinkled suit. She had on a blouse that looked expensive, but careless. 4 days late, they walked in like they owned the place. Room 219, Emily said softly to the nurse. We're here to collect her things and speak to someone about next steps. The nurse typed something in, then frowned. She was discharged last night, she said. All arrangements were made. Her lawyer handled everything. Tyler blinked. By who? She didn't answer, just handed over a flat manila envelope. No return address, no warmth. Inside was my letter. You always assumed I wouldn't outlast your patience. You were wrong. You always assumed silence meant permission. It didn't. I know everything, and I left you nothing. No signature, no affection, just one final truth. I may have raised you, but I no longer claim you not. Witnesses said Emily dropped the letter. Tyler bent to pick it up, but not before others saw the words. And in the attic window above, I watched. Not as a ghost, but as the woman who left before they even thought to say goodbye. Because I wasn't theirs anymore. And they were about to find out what that really meant. They pulled up to the house like they still owned it. Emily's Lexus sat crooked in the driveway. Tyler's truck idled behind, engine rumbling like it was impatient for the keys. He jumped out first, heading straight for the front door, tugging on the knob like it owed him something. It didn't budge. A new lockbox. A fresh brass plaque mounted beside the bell. This property is under legal review. For all inquiries, contact Kim Associates. Emily circled to the back, calling out like it was a fire drill. It's locked. Everything's locked. Of course it was. Us. A moment later, Russell's property manager pulled into the driveway, wearing a press suit and carrying a clipboard. I'm here on behalf of M's Joanna Pierce, he said. They froze. She's alive? Emily asked, like it ruined her weekend. Very much, he replied. And quite lucid. Would you like me to read her statement? He didn't wait for permission. Effective immediately, this property is no longer within your legal access or interest. Do not attempt entry. Any trespassing will be reported. A copy of the new deed has been mailed to your last known address. You were not listed as heirs. Do not return. He handed them each a sealed envelope. Emily didn't touch hers. Tyler took his like it was a ticket he didn't believe he deserved. They stood in the driveway, two adults in black clothes with nowhere to go. Then they sat, arguing at first, quiet later. Emily read her letter 3 times. Her mouth moved with the words. Then she threw it. Not gently, like it burned her fingers. I knew what part broke her. You never once called me Mom when no one was listening. Tyler paced in front of the rose garden I had planted with Richard 20 years ago. Emily just sat on the porch steps, lit a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the locked door. And for the first time, I saw it on her face, loss. Not just of the house, but of the story she told herself all these years. That no matter how far she strayed, she could always come back. And I would still be there. Still Mom. Still hers. Not anymore. 3 hours away from the life I left behind, tucked against the edge of a pine-covered hillside, there's a place called Second Bloom. No gates, no cameras, just a wooden sign carved by hand. You are not what they did. I stood there for a long while, suitcase in one hand, legal documents in the other. The air smelled like rosemary and new soil, quiet, clean, undemanding. Inside, I met Rosa, 63. Used to be a school principal before her son forged her name on 5 refinance loans. Margaret, 74, left her house with nothing but a purse and a folder of receipts after her husband of 40 years emptied their joint savings. We don't tell our stories right away. We sit, we plant, we write things we might never send. We make tea and speak our names like we're learning them again. No one asks who you were. They ask who you're becoming. For me, the healing didn't begin in the courtroom. It began here in the garden, pulling weeds beside a woman who never learned to say no until it nearly killed her. In the kitchen, cooking soup beside another who hadn't been called by her first name in over a decade. In the stillness between the wind and the breath it carries. I wasn't rebuilding the old version of myself. I was planting something new. And I understood now what they tried to take from me wasn't money or property or even love. It was identity. But identity, when rooted in truth, doesn't die, it survives. It blooms. Second Bloom isn't a shelter. It's a reckoning, a quiet revolt. Built for women who've been erased and now choose to be seen. And here, among strangers who felt like home, I started to remember what it felt like to belong. Not to others, but to myself. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence, when chosen, is power. I am Joanna Pierce. Not a footnote in someone else's story. Not a cautionary tale. Not a forgotten name on a deed. I am the woman who loved deeply, lost fiercely, and chose herself anyway. I didn't burn bridges. I built gates. And if you're listening, if you've ever been used, erased, or overlooked by the very people you gave everything to, know this. You're not alone. Your voice matters. And if this story spoke to you, like, share, leave a comment. Someone out there needs to hear it.
The words cut sharper than any knife could. If you want to give me a present, Mom, then get out of my life. You are the worst mother anyone could ever have. The dining hall of the Boston Country Club froze. Silverware paused in midair. A waiter holding a champagne bottle tilted it back before a single drop could fall. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I, Linda Parker, 59 years old, stood there holding the seating chart I had been trying to discuss. My daughter Emily, 28, stood across from me in her perfectly tailored rehearsal dinner dress. Her fiancé Ryan Mitchell shifted uncomfortably at her side, his wealthy parents looking on with quiet satisfaction, as though my humiliation was the evening's entertainment. I had only suggested moving her grandmother to a choir table, away from the band, so the old woman's hearing aids would not squeal. That was enough to ignite Emily's fury. "This is my wedding, not yours," she hissed. "You always try to control everything. You embarrass me." The words echoed through the hall. Ryan placed a hand on her arm, whispering for calm, but Emily shook him off. "If you really want to give me a wedding gift, disappear from my life. Forever." A brittle silence followed. Even the chandeliers seemed to buzz louder than the voices around us. I forced a smile, nodded politely to the Mitchells, and excused myself. With my back straight and my heels clicking against the marble floor, I walked out of the room that now felt like a courtroom, one where I had already been judged guilty. Inside the ladies' lounge, I caught my reflection in the mirror. A woman with silver-streaked hair, tired eyes, and a department store dress stood in place of the mother who had worked 2 jobs for decades. A mother who had stayed up nights sewing costumes, paying tuition, and writing notes inside lunchboxes. But was I really the worst mother anyone could have? That question would follow me through the long night ahead. What Emily had demanded, I realized, might be exactly what I needed to give her. That night, sleep never came. I lay awake in my small bedroom, staring at the ceiling, Emily's words replaying over and over in my mind. "Disappear from my life. You are the worst mother anyone could have." I thought back over the decades. I remembered the winters when I worked overnight shifts at the hospital, then went straight to my second job at the grocery store, just to keep the lights on. I remembered skipping meals so Emily could have ballet lessons and zat to tutoring. I remembered the small house I'd bought after her father walked out, every corner patched with love and sacrifice. And yet, in front of Ryan's wealthy family, I was reduced to nothing more than an embarrassment. By dawn, the hurt had hardened into something sharper: determination. I walked into the kitchen, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and pulled out the old filing box my father had given me. He used to say, "Linda, people can argue with your feelings, but they can't argue with paper." Inside were neatly labeled folders, deeds, bank statements, contracts. Proof of everything I had built and everything Emily had taken for granted. My eyes fell on the deed to the colonial-style house on Riverbend Drive, the very house Emily and Ryan had been living in for the past 2 years. Emily thought of it as her inheritance. What she never asked, never questioned, was that it was still mine, a gift I had planned to transfer on her wedding day. I traced the letters of my name printed on that deed. My father's handwriting echoed in my memory. "Don't give away what people don't respect." For years I had believed that giving was proof of love, that sacrifice would one day be rewarded with gratitude, but gratitude had never come. Instead, entitlement grew like ivy across a brick wall, choking out everything good between us. At 7 a.m. I picked up the phone and called Richard Allen, my father's longtime attorney. His voice carried surprise when I told him my plan. "Linda, are you sure? That house was supposed to be part of Emily's future." "No," I replied quietly but firmly. "That house is part of my future now. I want to sell it. Immediately." The line went silent for a long moment, and then Richard spoke again, steady and professional. "If you're ready, I can make some calls today. In this market, we could close within a week." "Do it," I said, and for the first time in years I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt free. By mid-morning, the sky outside my kitchen window glowed with the soft gold of a perfect June day. It should have been Emily's wedding day. Instead, I sat at the table, the surface covered with contracts, vendor receipts, and bank statements spread like puzzle pieces. The truth of the situation lay in every figure, every signature, proof that the grand celebration had been carried entirely on my shoulders. I reached for the phone again, this time dialing the number of Amanda Cole, the wedding planner Emily had insisted on hiring. Amanda's cheerful voice nearly sang through the receiver. "Mrs. Parker, I'm glad you called. We're finalizing the floral arrangements and the photographer's arrival schedule. I just need your confirmation on the cake delivery." "Amanda," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm, "cancel everything." A long pause followed. "Excuse me?" "Cancel the wedding. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the music, every last detail. Check your contract. I am the responsible party. My signature, my payments. I will handle the cancellation fees." "Mrs. Parker, with all due respect, that's impossible. The wedding is in just a few hours." "It's not impossible," I said, steady as steel. "It's already done. Please notify the vendors and confirm with me when each cancellation is complete." Her stunned silence spoke volumes. Then, with a hesitant voice, she agreed to review the contracts and proceed. One by one, I made the calls. the caterer, the florist, the quartet, the photographer. Each conversation began with disbelief, followed by reluctant acceptance as I cited the cancellation clauses and offered immediate payment for penalties. By 9:30, the entire $80,000 event had been dismantled piece by piece. As the silence of my now quiet phone settled around me, I realized how much weight had lifted. For 2 years, every spare dollar of my retirement fund had gone into this wedding. Every anxious night had been spent worrying about appearances, perfection, and Emily's endless demands. And in one morning, I had taken it all back. The house was being prepared for sale. The wedding was no more. And for the first time in decades, I was no longer working for someone else's dream. My final call was to my mother, Eleanor, 84 years old, who had been so excited to see her granddaughter walk down the aisle. "Mom," I said softly when she answered, "the wedding isn't happening today." A pause. "What happened, Linda? Is Emily hurt?" "No, Mom, she's fine. But she told me last night that the best gift I could give her was to disappear from her life." Silence on the other end, followed by a sigh filled with decades of wisdom. "Then maybe it's time you give her what she asked for. You've given enough already." Her words steadied me. The guilt I had carried began to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity. Today I wasn't ruining Emily's life. I was saving my own. At precisely 10 o'clock, the sharp sound of my doorbell broke the stillness. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Emily. She stood there in yoga pants and a silk robe, her face pale, her eyes wild. Behind her, Ryan's car idled in the driveway. "Mom, what is going on?" she demanded. "The makeup artist says you never showed up. The venue says everything is canceled. Margaret says you told her to call off the catering. Tell me this is some kind of mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Come inside, we need to talk." She stormed into the kitchen, stopping short when she saw the table. The neatly arranged folders, wedding expenses, education, property sat like silent witnesses to a lifetime of sacrifice. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice rising. "Sit down, Emily," I said evenly. "You've spent years building a picture of yourself that wasn't true. Today, that picture ends." Before she could answer, the front door opened again. Ryan rushed in, followed closely by his parents, Charles and Victoria Hamilton, their expressions a mix of confusion and suspicion. "Linda, what's happening?" Charles asked, his deep voice carrying the authority of a man used to getting answers. "The venue called us. They said the wedding was canceled. Surely that can't be right." "It is right," I replied, motioning to the table, "and you all deserve to know why." Emily leapt to her feet. "Mom, stop this. You're embarrassing me." I looked at her calmly. "Embarrassing you? Or revealing the truth you've hidden?" Victoria's sharp eyes swept over the documents. "Emily told us you couldn't contribute much, that Ryan's family would be covering most of the expenses. Was that a lie?" Emily's lips parted, but no sound came out. I slid the first folder across the table. Every contract, every receipt. $80,000, all from my accounts. "Your generous contributions, Victoria, exist only in Emily's stories." Ryan stared at Emily, his jaw tightening. "You told me your mom couldn't afford it, that we were paying for everything else." "She's twisting things," Emily snapped, her voice trembling. "No," I said firmly. "I'm showing you facts. These papers don't lie." I opened the second folder, filled with tuition receipts and bank transfers. Private school, college, law school. Every loan you thought had been forgiven by Ryan's father, paid by me. I drained my savings to make sure you graduated debt-free. Ryan's eyes widened. "You told me my father paid those loans off as a graduation gift." Emily's face flushed scarlet. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," I cut in. "Because it was easier to let people believe someone else solved your problems." The Hamiltons exchanged glances, their polished composure cracking. Finally, I slid the last folder forward, the property deed. "And then there's the house. The one on Riverbend Drive you've been living in. You told Ryan's parents it was your inheritance." Emily's hand shook as she reached for the deed, her eyes scanning until she froze on the line that read, "Owner, Linda Parker." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It's still yours." "Yes," I said, "and it always was. I allowed you to live there. I paid the taxes, the insurance. And as of yesterday, I've begun the process to sell it." "You can't do that," Emily cried, her voice breaking. "That's our home. It's not yours to lose, I answered quietly. It's mine to give. And I've decided not to. Silence filled the kitchen, heavy and undeniable. Ryan's parents stared at their son's fiancée with new eyes, the illusion of wealth and status stripped away in an instant. Ryan sat back, his face pale as the truth settled in. Emily turned to me, desperation in her eyes. Why are you doing this? I met her gaze steadily. Because last night you told me the best gift I could give you was to disappear from your life. Today, Emily, I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. For a long moment, no one moved. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Emily stood frozen, her fingers clenched around the deed as if holding it tightly would make it hers. Ryan finally broke the silence. His voice was low, strained. Emily, is it true? Did you let me believe lies about the loans, the house, the wedding? She turned to him quickly, eyes wet with panic. Ryan, please, you don't understand. I just wanted us to look equal. I didn't want your parents to think less of me, or of us. So maybe I let them assume some things, but it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean. Victoria cut in, her tone sharp. It doesn't mean you didn't mislead our family? That you didn't build your entire image on your mother's sacrifices while treating her like a burden? Emily's face twisted. You've always hated me, Victoria. You've never thought I was good enough for Ryan. Emily, Charles said sternly, this isn't about us. This is about honesty, and from what I'm hearing there hasn't been much of it. Emily's eyes darted between them, her voice rising. So what? Everyone lies a little. Everyone bends the truth to fit in. I had to. I wasn't going to let people look down on me because my mother, because she stopped herself too late. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. Because I worked 2 jobs? Because I didn't come from a country club family? Because I wasn't the picture-perfect parent you wanted to present to the world? Emily's silence was answer enough. Ryan pushed back from the table, pacing the small kitchen. You told me your mom refused to help with a down payment, that we had no choice but to move into her old house. You told me my parents were paying for most of the wedding. You told me. He stopped, rubbing his forehead. What else did you twist, Emily? What else isn't real? Her voice cracked. Ryan, I love you. I wanted us to have everything, to be admired, to not feel small. And the price for that admiration was lies, he shot back, at your mother's expense? Her tears spilled freely now. She's always been too much, always controlling, always making me feel like I owed her everything. I looked at her sadly. Owed me everything, or owed me honesty and respect. Emily, I never asked for repayment. I asked for gratitude, for acknowledgement. Instead, you stood in a crowded dining room and told me the best gift I could give you was to disappear. Her sobs grew louder, but no one moved to comfort her. Victoria's voice, cool and unflinching, cut through. Ryan, darling, you need to think very carefully about what kind of marriage this would be. Secrets, lies, deception, those are hard things to build a life on. Ryan looked torn, his eyes flicking from his weeping fiancée to the documents spread across the table. His voice was barely above a whisper. I don't even know who you are anymore, Emily. She reached for him desperately. Ryan, please, don't listen to them. It's still us. We can fix this. Just tell her to stop, tell her to give back the house, and everything can still be perfect. I shook my head slowly. Nothing about this is perfect, Emily. Not the lies, not the shame, not the way you've treated the people who love you. Actions have consequences. Today you're facing yours. Her eyes locked on mine, wide and furious through her tears. You're ruining my life. No, I said softly but firmly. I gave you a life. I sacrificed for it. I carried it on my back for nearly 3 decades. What you did with it, that was your choice. And now, so is what you do next. The weight of my words hung in the air. Emily collapsed into the chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing not just from anger but from the slow realization that the world she had carefully constructed was crumbling around her. Ryan remained standing, his face pale and unreadable, while his parents exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They had walked in expecting chaos, but not this. The truth was out, the lies were exposed, and for the first time in years I felt an unexpected calm. I had nothing left to hide, nothing left to explain. Emily's downfall wasn't orchestrated by me, it was the inevitable collapse of a house of cards built on entitlement and deception. The hours after the confrontation passed in a haze. Once the Prescotts left my house, Emily stayed slumped in the kitchen chair, staring at the table, as though the documents might somehow rearrange themselves into a less damning truth. I quietly gathered the folders, sliding them back into the cabinet. For years, I had carried proof of every sacrifice: receipts, contracts, tuition bills like a private shield. Now that they had been revealed, I no longer needed to keep them on display. The truth had been spoken aloud. "Emily," I said gently, "you should go. Take some time to think about what you want, not just from Ryan, but from yourself. I'll be leaving tomorrow, and you'll need to clear your things from the house by this evening." Her head snapped up, eyes red and swollen. "You're really doing this? Selling the house, canceling the wedding, walking away from me?" "I'm not walking away from you," I corrected softly. "I'm stepping toward myself." She made a bitter sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. "That's the same thing." "No," I said firmly, "it's not." She stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You'll regret this, Mom. One day you'll be alone, and you'll realize you pushed me away." Her words stung, but not the way they once would have. I had been living alone in spirit for years, carrying the weight of unspoken resentment. Now, at least my solitude would be honest. When she finally stormed out, slamming the door behind her, the house fell silent. For the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt freeing. That evening, I walked through the rooms of my modest home, touching familiar objects. The dress I had bought for the wedding, still hanging in the laundry room. The guest book one had crafted by hand. The emergency kit of aspirin and Band-Aids I had assembled. Artifacts of a celebration that would never take place. Instead of grief, I felt a quiet clarity. These things represented years of effort I had poured into making others comfortable, while forgetting my own comfort. I carefully boxed them up, deciding I would donate most of it. Someone else could make use of them, someone who still believed in the joy of celebration untainted by bitterness. My phone buzzed on the counter, another message from Emily, this time not angry but pleading. "Mom, please, just let the house stay, we'll figure everything else out. Don't sell it. Please." I didn't reply. Boundaries, I reminded myself. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. The next morning, I drove to Jonathan's office to finalize the sale. He looked at me with quiet respect as I signed the papers. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "Completely," I answered. "It's not just about a house. It's about a life I no longer want to live in." By noon, the deal was complete. The funds would transfer within 48 hours. Half would go toward my new start by the sea. Half had already been allocated to the Scholarship Foundation for Single Mothers. A circle completed. My father's accounting lessons turned into real-world legacy. That night, as I packed the last suitcase, my elderly mother, Helen, called. Her voice, steady as always, carried the reassurance I didn't know I needed. "You've done the hardest part, Sophia," she said. "You've drawn the line. It hurts, but it will save you. And maybe it will save Emily too if she chooses to learn from it." Her words settled into my heart. Saving Emily wasn't my job anymore. She would have to face herself, her choices, her lies. I had given her everything a mother could. Now it was her turn to decide who she wanted to become without leaning on me. The following day, I loaded my car with the essentials: clothes, important documents, a few cherished books, and a framed photograph of my parents on their wedding day. I left behind anything that felt like an anchor to the past. As I drove south toward the coast, the road stretched ahead like a blank canvas. Mile by mile, the weight lifted. I rolled down the window, letting the salt air greet me long before I reached the ocean. In the quiet of that drive, I realized the truth that had taken me 58 years to understand. Motherhood doesn't mean martyrdom. Love doesn't mean losing yourself, and boundaries don't mean abandonment, they mean dignity. For the first time, I wasn't just Emily's mother. I was Sophia Carter, a woman with her own story still unfolding. And that, I thought as the horizon widened before me, was the most powerful revenge of all. Not bitterness, not retaliation, but finally choosing myself. When I finally stood on the Carolina coast, waves brushing the shoreline with their endless rhythm, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The kind that doesn't scream or demand but settles into your bones like a quiet truth. Looking back, people might say I was cruel for canceling my daughter's wedding, for selling the house she thought would be hers, for walking away. But here is the truth: cruelty would have been continuing the charade, letting her live inside lies, and sacrificing myself until there was nothing left. Boundaries aren't punishment. They are clarity. and clarity is often the sharpest gift we can give to the people we love. I thought about my father's words, written in that letter I found, reminding me that people can argue with opinions, but not with numbers. I had spent my life proving my worth in numbers: school tuition, mortgage payments, canceled wedding contracts, all neat lines of sacrifice. But in the end, the most important number was me, one life, one chance to finally live for myself. As the sun dipped lower, painting the water in strokes of gold, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, but for growth. That one day Emily would see not only the sacrifices I made, but also the strength it took to finally stop. Maybe she would hate me for it. Maybe she would never understand. But maybe, just maybe, she would one day realize that my refusal to keep carrying her was the truest form of love. Because love without boundaries is not love, it's surrender. I don't know if Emily and I will find our way back to each other. What I do know is that for the first time in decades, I am not defined by someone else's needs. I am defined by my choices, my dignity, and my future. And to you, listening to my story, if you've ever felt like you've been pushed aside, taken for granted, or treated like your worth is invisible, I want you to hear me clearly. Your life is yours. Your sacrifices have meaning, but they don't make you a servant. You have the right to say enough. You have the right to choose yourself. Maybe that means setting a boundary with a child, or a partner, or a friend. Maybe it means finally pursuing the life you put on hold for others. Whatever it looks like, know this: choosing yourself is not selfish. It is survival. So if you've walked this far with me, I ask you to take one step further. Share this story if it touched you. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. I love hearing your voices, your cities, your journeys. It reminds me that none of us walk alone. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. Because here we don't just tell stories, we share truths. Truths about betrayal, truths about resilience, truths about the quiet power of reclaiming your life. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you hear someone tell you you're the worst, you'll remember that sometimes being the worst in their eyes means being the best for yourself. My name is Helen Parker, and at 67 years old I thought I had seen enough of life to no longer be surprised. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment I walked into the EQ with a small basket of homemade cookies for my son. I expected to see his familiar smile light up the room, the same smile he had since he was a boy. Instead, I found Michael lying unconscious, surrounded by machines keeping him alive after a massive heart attack. Michael Parker is 42 years old, a hard-working attorney who built his career case by case, always fighting for justice in the courtroom. As his mother, I had always been proud of his determination, even if it meant late nights and constant stress. He has two beautiful children, Emily, age 8, and Jacob, age 5. They are the lights of his life. But on that day, neither his children nor his wife were by his side. Michael's wife, Samantha, should have been the first person the nurses called, the one holding his hand through the storm. Instead, she was 3 time zones away, sipping cocktails in Las Vegas, posting filtered photos with another man. While her husband fought for his life, she was flaunting a new dress on Instagram, hashtags full of joy and celebration. I cannot describe the ache that gripped my chest. If you have ever trusted someone to care for the person you love most, only to discover their betrayal at the worst possible time, then you will understand the kind of silence that fell over me in that hospital room. It was not just disappointment, it was a hollow sort of grief. Grief not only for my son's fragile body lying in that bed, but also for the family I thought he had, the loyalty I assumed he could count on. In that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. Life has a cruel way of showing us who truly belongs in our circle. When everything collapses, some people will stand stronger beside you, while others will run in search of brighter lights. That day in the ICU, I knew which one Samantha was. And I also knew I could not let her reckless choices decide the future of my son or his children. In the hours after Michael's heart attack, as I sat by his bedside listening to the steady rhythm of the machines, my mind kept circling back to the moments I should have noticed. The red flags were not sudden, dramatic explosions. They were small, deliberate cuts so quiet you only realize the damage when you are already bleeding. Looking back, it is astonishing how clearly the pattern emerges. At the time, however, I dismissed them, because that is what mothers often do when we want to believe our children are happy. 2 years earlier, Samantha had been polite, even warm, when she first joined the family. She hosted dinners, laughed at our jokes, and made sure Michael seemed well cared for. But slowly, her behavior shifted. It started with little comments disguised as concern. Helen seems so tired. Maybe it's too much for her to watch the kids every weekend. Or, I think Helen gets a little forgetful sometimes. Maybe we should make things easier for her. At first, I brushed them off as thoughtless remarks. But over time, these suggestions built a wall between me and my grandchildren. Soon, visits with Emily and Jacob became less frequent. Samantha always had a new excuse: soccer practice, a birthday party, a school event that somehow never involved grandparents. Family dinners turned into hurried phone calls. Where I once had been welcome in their home, I suddenly needed permission. Still, I told myself not to complain. After all, every family goes through busy seasons. I convinced myself it was temporary. The financial signs were there too, though I ignored them. Samantha once called me on a weekday morning, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Helen, darling, we're taking Michael on a little getaway. He's been working so hard, and I think he needs a break. Just in case something happens, can I have your credit card information for emergencies?" I hesitated, but only for a moment. She sounded so caring, so considerate, and I wanted to support Michael's marriage. So I gave her access to my emergency account, the one where I had carefully saved $50,000 for unexpected needs, the children's college fund, or a medical crisis. The irony is not lost on me now that very account meant to protect my family became her spending fund. It is easy, in hindsight, to feel foolish, to ask yourself how you could have been so blind. But many of you listening may understand this: when you love someone deeply, you sometimes ignore the whispers of doubt. You tell yourself that loyalty, trust, and marriage vows mean something. You hope the little inconsistencies are just mistakes, not patterns. And so you look away, convincing yourself everything is fine. I looked away until it was almost too late. Sitting in that cold hospital room, watching my son fight for his life, I realized I had been giving Samantha too much credit for too long. The red flags were never subtle. I had just chosen not to see them. And now, I would not allow myself to make that mistake again. That night, as the machines hummed steadily and Michael lay unconscious, I realized waiting quietly was no longer an option. My son had fought his whole life to build a career, a home, and a future for his children. I was not going to let all of that be drained away by someone who cared more about champagne than her husband's heartbeat. So I did what I never imagined I would have the courage to do. I opened my phone and logged into the banking app Michael had once helped me set up. Technology had never been my strength, but in that moment my hands did not shake. I scrolled through line after line of transactions: luxury hotels, expensive dinners, spa treatments, none of which had anything to do with emergencies. Over $12,000 had been spent in just 3 days, all under the name of family expenses. My emergency account, the one meant for medical bills or college savings, was being drained in real time. The fury that rose in me was like fire in my chest. Protecting my son meant acting now. Within minutes, I froze every account Samantha had access to and downloaded the entire transaction history as proof. But I did not stop there. I called Patricia Gomez, an old friend from my church who had become a private investigator after her own painful divorce. Patricia had a way of finding answers in places most people never thought to look. When I explained the situation, she promised to dig into Samantha's activities immediately. It did not take long for the truth to surface. Patricia confirmed that Samantha was not at a spa retreat for her nerves, as she had claimed. She was checked in at a luxury hotel in Las Vegas with a man named Ryan Cole, a 35-year-old personal trainer, an aspiring model who had conveniently become Samantha's new fitness instructor 8 months earlier. While Michael was collapsing at work from exhaustion and stress, Samantha was drinking champagne poolside with Ryan, charging every indulgence to accounts she thought no one would question. The first call from Samantha came less than an hour after I froze the accounts. Her voice was tight, the false sweetness gone. "Helen, something is wrong with the cards. They're all being declined." I could hear the panic underneath her polished tone. For the first time in 2 years, I felt calm. "Oh dear," I said evenly. "That does sound inconvenient. Where did you say you were again?" It was in that moment I realized the balance of power had shifted. For too long, Samantha had dictated the terms of this family. But as I sat beside my son, holding his hand and hearing the steady beep of the monitors, I knew the turning point had come. She could no longer hide behind lies, and I was just getting started. By Saturday morning, the impossible happened. Michael's eyelids fluttered, and for the first time in 2 days, his eyes opened. The relief that surged through me nearly knocked the breath out of my chest. His gaze was groggy, confused, but when it settled on me, I saw recognition and something softer, gratitude. "Mom," he whispered, his voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed hours earlier. I leaned forward, tears stinging my eyes. "I'm here, sweetheart. You gave us all quite a scare." He tried to sit up, wincing as the monitors beeped. "Where's Samantha?" The question I had been dreading cut through the air like a blade. I hesitated. How do you tell your son, still weak from a heart attack, that his wife had chosen luxury over loyalty? That she was not by his side when he needed her most? "She's traveling," I said carefully. "But I've been here with you." Michael frowned, searching my face as if he already sensed the truth. "Traveling? During all this?" His voice cracked, not only from weakness but from the weight of betrayal. I held his hand tighter, knowing I could not shield him forever. "We'll talk about it when you're stronger," I murmured. But Michael shook his head slowly, determination flickering in his eyes. "I already know, Mom. I've known something was wrong for months." His words stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" I asked. His voice steadied as though he were back in the courtroom, presenting facts to a jury. The secretive phone calls, the sudden obsession with fitness classes, the new clothes. "I hired a private investigator 6 weeks ago. Her name is Sandra Lee. She's also a lawyer. We've been building a case." I stared at him, stunned. While I thought I was uncovering the truth, Michael had already been gathering his own evidence. "You knew about Ryan Cole?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded grimly. "Personal trainer, 35, likes expensive watches and even more expensive vacations. They've been seeing each other for 8 months. What I didn't know," he said, his expression hardening, "was that she would actually leave while I was fighting for my life." For a moment, silence filled the room except for the hum of the machines. Then, to my surprise, Michael gave a weak laugh that quickly turned into a cough. "Mom, you magnificent woman. Did you really freeze the accounts?" I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips despite everything. "Every last one of them. She won't be charging another spa treatment to this family ever again." His eyes lit with pride, a glimmer of the strong man I knew. "Good, because now we go on the offensive." I looked at my son, pale and frail in the hospital bed, yet speaking with the steel of a seasoned attorney. He wasn't just surviving, he was preparing for battle. "Call Sandra," he said firmly. "Tell her it's time. Divorce papers, custody, assets, everything. Samantha abandoned me when it mattered most. That is all the evidence we'll ever need." For the first time since walking into that ICU, I believed we might actually come out of this stronger than before. The day Michael decided to move forward with divorce proceedings, everything shifted. His attorney, Sandra Lee, arrived at the hospital carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of quiet confidence that only comes from years of courtroom battles. She spoke with Michael as though he were already back in his office, discussing strategy instead of lying in a hospital bed. "You have the evidence, Michael. Adultery, abandonment during a medical emergency, financial misconduct. Any judge will see through her act." Michael nodded, his face pale but resolute. "I want custody of Emily and Jacob. I can't let Samantha take them away." That evening, Samantha returned home unexpectedly. She must have found a way to borrow money for the flight, because she came storming into the driveway like a thundercloud. I watched from the window as she slammed the car door, her hair unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her usual composure shattered. She barged into the house without knocking. "Where are my children?" she demanded, her voice sharp with panic. I stepped between her and the staircase, keeping my tone calm. "They're safe, Samantha. Safe with people who actually showed up when they were needed." Her eyes narrowed. "You had no right to interfere with our accounts. That money belongs to me too." I shook my head slowly. "No, that money was Michael's hard-earned income and my emergency savings. You used it to fund vacations with your lover. That ends now." She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, a small voice came from the stairs. "Mommy." It was Emily, her face pale and confused. Behind her, Jacob clutched his sister's hand, his wide eyes filled with uncertainty. Samantha's tone flipped instantly, becoming syrupy sweet. "Baby, Mommy's home. Come give me a hug." But Emily didn't move. Instead, she asked the question none of us could soften. "Daddy was in the hospital. Why weren't you here?" The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation an adult could give. Samantha stammered, I was traveling, sweetheart. I came as soon as I could." Emily looked at me, then back at her mother. "Grandma took care of Daddy, not you." The truth, spoken from the lips of an 8-year-old, cut deeper than any lawyer's argument. Samantha's face crumpled, but before she could spin another excuse, the front door opened again. Sandra Lee stepped inside, carrying a folder of documents. "Perfect timing," she said coolly. "Mrs. Parker, I was hoping to find you here." Samantha straightened defensively. "You can't keep me from my children. This is my house too." Sandra placed the folder on the table with deliberate calm. "Not anymore. The court has issued a temporary restraining order. You are barred from removing the children from their father's custody. Any visitation will be supervised." Samantha's face went from pale to red with fury. "You can't do this." Sandra met her gaze without flinching. "Actually, we can. Abandonment, adultery, and financial theft leave little room for negotiation." She handed over the papers. "You may read them carefully. I suggest you do." Emily, still standing on the stairs, whispered, "Mommy, did you really leave when Daddy was sick?" Samantha closed her eyes, tears streaking her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "I made terrible choices." Emily shook her head, her voice quiet but certain. "Then maybe you should go. Daddy needs peace." In that single moment, Samantha lost something greater than money or property. She lost the unquestioning trust of her own children, and there was no court order in the world that could restore it. For a brief moment, I thought the storm was finally passing. Samantha had been confronted, the legal process was moving swiftly, and Michael's recovery was steady. But life has a cruel habit of twisting just when you start to breathe easier. The call came one quiet afternoon while I was in the garden with Emily, showing her how to pinch the dead blooms off the roses. "Mrs. Parker." The voice on the other end was professional, steady. "This is Dr. Wilson from Riverside Memorial. I'm calling about your daughter-in-law, Samantha. She has been admitted following what appears to be a suicide attempt." The pruning shears fell from my hands. My first reaction was disbelief. Samantha, the woman who had caused so much destruction, now lying in a hospital bed herself. But before I could gather my thoughts, the doctor added, "She specifically requested to see you. She claims she has information about threats to your family." My instinct screamed it was another manipulation, but a mother's intuition also warned me not to dismiss it too quickly. An hour later, I found myself walking down the sterile hallway of the psychiatric wing, the air heavy with quiet desperation. Samantha looked nothing like the woman who once strutted into parties in designer heels. She was pale, her hair unkempt, her eyes swollen from crying. When she saw me, her voice was barely a whisper. "Helen, thank you for coming." I stood at a careful distance. "The doctor said you had something important to tell me." She nodded, tears slipping down her face. "Ryan isn't who I thought he was. When the money stopped, when I was stuck in Vegas, he changed. He started talking about other ways to get money from your family." My stomach tightened. "What other ways?" Samantha lowered her gaze. "He's been researching you. Your life insurance, your property, your savings. He said accidents happen all the time, and no one questions them when someone your age passes naturally." A cold shiver ran through me. She went on, her words tumbling out in fragments. "At first I thought it was just anger. But then he showed me documents, insurance policies he forged, papers with your name, your signature copied. He told me he didn't need me alive, that he could still collect even if I wasn't there to play my part." I gripped the arms of the chair beside her bed. "Are you telling me he was planning to kill me?" "And Michael?" Samantha nodded weakly. "Make it look like an accident, a fall down the stairs, a car crash, leave the children orphaned, and somehow I'd still inherit." It was almost too much to take in. The betrayal of infidelity was one thing, but this was survival. Then she reached into the drawer and handed me her phone. I recorded him, every plan, every threat. 12 hours of conversations. I thought I was keeping souvenirs of our relationship. Instead, I documented a murder plot. For the first time, I believed her. Samantha was guilty of many things, but the fear in her eyes was real. And suddenly, I realized our family was facing a danger far greater than heartbreak. The FBI moved faster than I ever expected. With Samantha's recordings and the forged documents she provided, federal agents had more than enough to act. 3 days later, Ryan Cole was arrested in the parking lot of a motel outside of town. He wasn't there by accident. According to surveillance, he had been watching my house, timing when I came and went, likely preparing the accident that would have set his plan into motion. The thought made me tremble, but it also filled me with gratitude that we had stopped him before he could touch my family. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh explained it plainly as she laid a stack of evidence on Michael's kitchen table. "Ryan has done this before. 3 other states, different women, same pattern: seduce, extract financial information, plan staged accidents for wealthy family members. Your daughter-in-law wasn't his first victim. She's just the first one who turned on him with proof. Michael sat across from her, pale but stronger than he had been days earlier. He shook his head slowly. So in a twisted way, Samantha's betrayal actually saved us. The agent nodded. If she hadn't recorded him, we wouldn't have enough to prosecute. Michael sighed, the weight of relief and sorrow mixing in his expression. What happens to her now? Agent Walsh folded her hands. She'll testify. The fraud charges against her will remain, but with her cooperation, the punishment will likely be lighter. She's still responsible for the choices she made, but she may help prevent Ryan from destroying other families. I studied Samantha's recordings later that night. Hearing Ryan's casual tone as he discussed accidents for me and my son chilled me to the bone. Yet it was undeniable Samantha had handed us the key to ending his schemes. Meanwhile, Sandra Lee worked swiftly to secure Michael's divorce. Adultery, abandonment, financial theft, and now conspiracy by association. No judge could overlook that mountain of evidence. Temporary custody became permanent, and Samantha's visits with Emily and Jacob would be supervised by court order. The children, blissfully unaware of the darkest details, only knew their father was safe at home and their grandmother was always nearby. That was enough for now. The morning Ryan was officially charged, I walked into Michael's kitchen and found him sipping tea, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I feel free, Mom," he said. "For the first time in years, I feel truly free." I squeezed his hand, meeting his eyes. "You fought in courtrooms for so many clients, Michael. This time you fought for yourself and you won." Justice had arrived, not through revenge alone, but through truth, persistence, and the courage to face the ugliest betrayal head-on. 2 weeks later, life began to resemble something close to normal again. Michael was recovering at home, slowly regaining his strength. Emily and Jacob settled back into their routines, running through the house with laughter that felt like a balm after so many tense, silent days. I often found myself sitting on the porch in the evenings, just listening to those sounds, children's giggles, the hum of neighbors mowing their lawns, the faint music from a passing car, ordinary noises that had almost been stolen from us. Samantha's story wasn't over. She remained in treatment and under legal supervision. Though her choices had hurt Michael deeply, she was also the reason Ryan's plot came to light. That contradiction was hard to live with. How do you reconcile the woman who betrayed your son's marriage with the woman who provided the evidence that saved his life? The truth is, sometimes people can be both villains and unlikely allies. And sometimes forgiveness and trust are two very different things. I could not forgive everything Samantha had done, but I could acknowledge that in the end, she chose to reveal the truth. One evening, Emily climbed onto my lap while I was knitting. "Grandma," she asked softly, "is Mommy bad?" Her wide eyes searched my face, hungry for honesty. I took a deep breath. "Sweetheart, Mommy made mistakes. Big mistakes. But making bad choices doesn't always mean someone is bad forever. What matters now is that you and Jacob know you are loved and safe. Daddy will always be here for you. And so will I." She nodded slowly, as if weighing those words carefully before resting her head on my shoulder. Children understand more than we give them credit for. They feel the truth, even when they can't fully explain it. As for me, I learned a lesson I'll carry for the rest of my days. Betrayal hurts most when it comes from inside the circle of trust. But pain doesn't have to break us, it can sharpen our resolve. By freezing those accounts, by refusing to stay silent, I protected my son and my grandchildren. That is what family is meant to do. And maybe that's what true revenge really is, not vengeance that seeks to destroy, but strength that refuses to be destroyed. To anyone listening, take this from me. Never ignore the red flags. Never be afraid to step in when someone you love is at risk. And never underestimate the power of a mother, a father, or a grandparent determined to protect their family. Sometimes the quiet heroes are the ones sitting in hospital chairs or kitchen tables, making the hard choices nobody sees. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to share it. Click like, leave a comment with your own experience, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Because your voice matters, and together we remind the world that love, truth, and courage will always be stronger than betrayal.